Abu Bakir Al-Baghdadi was killed in a raid by Delta forces. Donald Trump came out and of course took credit for it, but that's for a different time to discuss. What I wanted to discuss here was why al-Baghdadi rose in the first place. Who was he, and why did he become this monster that we knew? He actually was a completely inconsequential person growing up in Iraq. He was not from Syria, he was from Iraq. And his dad was a shepherd, very simple, very poor shepherd in the middle of Iraq. And he went and got training to become a religious scholar. He actually went to Saddam University. Now back then that existed obviously. And he even got a master's and a doctorate in that. And he was a weird guy back then. He was a loner. He did not do well in math. These are funny little things. He was actually, his best grade was in art. He got a 95 out of 100 in art, okay. And he actually coached the local soccer team for young kids. And they said he had, because he would do the call to prayer. And when you do the call to prayer, it almost sounds like a song as you're calling people to the mosque. And they said he had a quote, sweet voice. Now, he did not have sweet thoughts even back then, because some of the kids were freaked out by him proselytizing about fundamentalist Islam even during the soccer games. And so, but remember back then, Iraq was controlled by Saddam Hussein, which meant that it was quite secular. It was not fundamentalist Muslim. Saddam Hussein was opposed to Al-Qaeda and opposed to fundamentalist Islam because it presented a challenge to his reign. He was a general and he was secular and did not like extremist Muslims, and often imprisoned them, tortured them, and killed them. So at the time, if Saddam remained in charge, there would have been many, many atrocities, but a guy like al-Baghdadi would not have risen at all. He would have remained a weirdo soccer coach and part-time imam in a small little town in Iraq, and would have been incredibly inconsequential. If he decided to organize anything at all, he would have had no avenue to organize it under Saddam Hussein's reign. And if he was well known in circles as organizing militant Islam, Saddam likely would have imprisoned or executed him. So now, again, that doesn't make Saddam a good guy. He was terrible for other reasons. But when we invaded Iraq, we created chaos. And this is exactly the chaos we were warning you about on the Young Turks, because we've been around forever. So Ben and I, back in the day, before the Iraq war, said, don't go in, it's a terrible idea. And at the time, I remember saying, look guys, when you have mayhem, what's going to happen? You're going to have people start to fight. You're going to have the Sunnis and the Shia fight, because they are fundamentally different sects of Islam. And when you have a chaotic fight like that, the most violent and the most fundamentalist will win. As the war started, I thought I was right because of the Badr Brigade and another fundamentalist, Shia, that was starting to take control. He actually began to recede, but now he's actually has the most amount of votes in the Iraqi government. So he hasn't gone anywhere either. So that's a different fundamentalist, but he's in the Shia sect. Whereas al-Baghdadi rose up. How did he rise up? Because it looks, we arrested him about a year after the war began because he was doing something terrible? No, actually the going theory now, there's a couple of theories, but the going theory is we accidentally arrested him when we did a raid of his brother-in-law's house that he happened to be in at the time. He goes into a prison that we're running, and you know those were not ideal situations to say the least. There were torture in that prison. We have no idea that he was tortured or mistreated in any way, but prisoners started organizing themselves, and he became an emir of his cell block. And then he started discriminating against the Shia. He started doing violence against the Shia because now he got mayhem. So he says, okay, great. Well, in this situation, I'm going to tell you that the Sunnis are right and the Shias are wrong, and let's start to punish them violently. So he kicks all the Shia out of his block. Then he goes on to start to tell people what you can and can't do, what the size of your beard should be, what kind of music you should listen to, whether you could have tobacco. And then we let him out because it looks like we likely arrested him when we shouldn't have. So now he's even more radicalized from being in prison and is now empowered and becomes part of the insurgency. So at the time, he then gets a new nickname, Abu Dua. Later, he becomes Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi when he proclaims himself the head of the caliphate, the head of all Muslims theoretically. And at his height, he captured territory the size of Great Britain. He captured Mosul. That's a city that's gigantic, has 1.4 million people in it. He had people from hundreds of countries join his fight, tens of thousands of fighters. Part of the reason he did the grotesque violence that he did apparently was because he partly enjoyed it. He's a sadist and a terrible guy. But the other reason was basically marketing, drawing people in, saying, hey, if you come here, we're gonna show you spectacular victories over forces that you couldn't imagine us beating. And his way of doing that was these outrageous executions and maimings that he would put out on video. So obviously, the area that they controlled became massive. The world united against him, and eventually it did him in. But in the meanwhile, endless number of people were killed, maimed, and mayhem was created. So would al-Baghdadi have become the terrorist leader that he was if we had not invaded Iraq? There is a definitive answer to that. Hell no. There's no way that would have happened. Al-Qaeda existed before we invaded Iraq. In fact, Al-Qaeda had nothing to do with Iraq. Al-Qaeda wound up coming into Iraq because of the chaos we created, but was not in there before because Saddam was fundamentally opposed to them. But ISIS was purely 100% because of the Iraq invasion. So today's a great day because al-Baghdadi is gone and he won't get to terrorize anybody anymore. But understand that if you're looking to find out who's the culprit in the rise of al-Baghdadi, obviously al-Baghdadi himself and all the insurgents, but anyone who couldn't foresee that you would have that chaos, you would have a civil war between Sunnis and Shia, and that it would devolve into violence like this, namely George W. Bush and Dick Cheney. So anyone who tells you otherwise is doing political correctness and in revisionist history. The reality is those monsters wouldn't have existed if it wasn't for the decisions Bush and Cheney made. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.